So I would love to welcome you to today's episode of Got Transition Radio. My name is Mallory Sear, and I am the Youth Program Manager for Got Transition. Eileen Valenza, who is usually my co-host, is actually not able to be present for this episode, but we have a wonderful guest speaker who is accompanying me today, and I will introduce her in a moment. This radio show is part of Got Transition, the National Center on Healthcare Transition, which is funded through a cooperative agreement with HRSA and the Maternal Child Health Bureau. This is a monthly half-hour event for you to join the conversation about transition topics and hear about lessons learned from the transition experiences of others. So in our previous episodes, we've gotten a lot of feedback from our listeners that people want to hear more real experiences with transition and some lessons learned from people who have lived it. Although Eileen and I do have our stories, we are only two of so many other people going through this. As we were exploring the idea of accessibility for an episode, we were led to Teresa Nguyen, who not only works helping young adults get accommodations in a school setting at Colorado University Boulder, but she also has so much experience of her own about living independently and her healthcare experiences. So I am very excited to welcome her here today. Welcome, Teresa.
Thank you.
And before we do get started, I want to quickly review some housekeeping items and how you can contribute to the conversation and get your questions answered. On the webinar panel on the right side of your screen, you will see a chat box, and there's a box that says questions. You can use this or the box that says chat to type in your comments and questions, and we will respond to them throughout the episode. If you don't get your question answered, please don't worry, as all the questions and answers will be answered more in depth and posted on our website after the show. So with that, I would love to just jump in the conversation. Teresa, you have also been quite involved with the state of Colorado's transition work and worked a little bit with their Youth Advisory Council. Can you talk about that experience and kind of how you got started in all of that?
Yeah, in 2009, I think I was a junior in college. My primary care physician, Laura Pickler, approached me about this opportunity to kind of join the Youth Advisory Council to work on a little bit of the medical home approach in healthcare. And obviously, I'm a big fan of that. And so I decided to get involved, and I've learned a lot on this council, not only about the policy side of healthcare, but just about other youth's needs as well as mine on this council, and it kind of has expanded my self-advocacy role just in school.
Awesome. So what are some things that you did with the Youth Advisory Council? Were you a member? Did you present places? Like what kind of doors did that open for you?
So yes, I was a member for two years, and a lot of things that we did included presentations. I presented to a lot of the healthcare professionals in Colorado, particularly in Denver, a lot of the med students down at Anschutz campus. We worked on some documents, I think particularly a brochure that kind of outlines what a medical home is and what we hope to move forward with in healthcare as far as a more coordinated approach. And we also just kind of did like advisory meetings within the council to kind of expand our ideas a little bit and get them forwarded to the right people.
Awesome. This is Mallory. I was actually lucky enough to work with the Denver Youth Advisory Council for some consulting, and I know, Teresa, you weren't at that meeting, so we didn't get to meet at that point. But it's a great opportunity for many people, and they do some great youth leadership work as well. So I have to say I am really excited to have Teresa here with us today. And when we spoke earlier as we prepared for this episode, we discovered we had so much to talk about. And through Teresa's experience, we really had a lot in common. But what we really want to get to in this episode is the healthcare piece. But I do think it's important to give a little bit of background information. And Teresa, one thing that you said that really struck me as a theme in our conversation was that once you can advocate for yourself in school or in your primary setting, it sort of sets the tone for the rest of your life. Can you talk about your experiences in school and how you really managed to advocate and get your needs met and kind of what that was like for you?
Yes, definitely. So as a entering freshman to University of Colorado Boulder, I was actually pretty skeptical of the whole accessibility on campus, just because of the campus is very old, and there was also a lack of students with disabilities on campus. Fortunately, after asking a lot of questions before accepting, I found that not only were the faculty and the staff, but also the administrators were all very accommodating to me. A lot of them just weren't aware or sure of where to get started with accommodations and with creativity. And I quickly realized that the awareness was key to helping people understand where you were coming from as a student that requires these accommodations. I learned that, it's really important to highlight and emphasize your abilities to succeed, regardless of the limitations that you might have, because, generally professors and departments in higher education just really want to know how these really specific and really kind of creative accommodations, how do they help you in the long-term goals. And I have an example of that. When I was a junior in college, I took a course that was part of my physiology major requirement. It was an anatomy lab that happened to deal with cadavers. And the tables that held these cadavers were very high, a lot higher than the height of my power wheelchair. And so when I approached the department with this concern of not being able to work directly with the cadavers, the department came up with a suggestion as to waive my credits for this lab. They couldn't see really another fitting option for me at the time. And although I really did appreciate that gesture of waiving my credits, I was concerned about graduate school. And I had contacted a couple of these schools about what my admissions would be like if my credits were waived for anatomy lab. And it turns out that there is no substitute for this requirement and that it would definitely hinder my admissions into the schools. And also I realized that besides the logistics of graduate school, I wanted to be able to have the same quality of education as my peers, to be able to work kind of directly with the cadavers, just like my classmates. So ultimately, after having several very long discussions about how waiving my credits would not fit into my future goals, the solution ended up being pretty simple. We were able to bring a lift into the classroom twice a week, and every time that the lab was in session, I would just drive my wheelchair onto the platform, and it would raise me up to the height of the cadavers. It was an extremely creative solution, but the initial reaction could definitely lead to a lot of students settling for less of an experience. And I guess at that point I realized that college was not just a checklist for me to go through, certain credits and get them checked off on the transcript, but I actually wanted the whole experience of college. And I was fortunate enough to kind of convince the people around me that, that experience was worth it to me. So I encourage a lot of people to just kind of think about long-term goals and how, that one accommodation would how that would get them there. and try to, I don't know, envision that and kind of help the other people that might not be as aware to realize that.
And I think, this is Mallory, I think that's such a great story. And I think a lot of the advocacy we do, both, whether it's in education or healthcare, although it's one person who needs that accommodation, you don't know what students are, or patients are going to be coming after you who will benefit from that. And I had really similar experiences on my campus where, although I was the one who, needed to get into that building or have that experience, or get in all the buildings, other people are going to come to that school, and it's going to reflect better on that practice or on that institution to make those changes. And one thing that really sticks out to me when you talk about that, Teresa, is how adamant you were about that long-term planning. And personally, I don't think that's something I would have thought of, to go that far ahead and say, how will this reflect on my, getting accepted to grad school. I would probably just be like, okay, waive the credit. But it really is about looking at that whole picture and that person-centered planning part, and I think it's great that you were able to take the lead on that. So, and you're currently still working at the university, correct? Can you kind of explain your role and how you help others get their adaptations?
Yeah, so I became an intern in the Office of Disability Services at the end of my senior year, and I had always had a curiosity that, I was always on the receiving end of these accommodations, but I wanted to know what it took, kind of legally, and just what were the everyday tasks that were involved into putting these accommodations into place for students. And so right now I am an administrative assistant to 7 disability specialists in our office, and my role, I guess, is to support those 7 staff members. So scheduling a lot of appointments and kind of actually reviewing the documentation before the specialists review it, just to make sure that, it encompasses everything that they need to know about the disability and how the impact of the disability impacts their education. And so it is, it's a lot of heavy reading, but it's really interesting reading. I really enjoy that. And then I also serve as a liaison to different departments on campus, to promote awareness and to kind of be involved in a lot of the processes that are happening on campus to put in place a universally designed model for including all students.
Excellent. So knowing kind of where you have come from and your experience, we also talked about sort of the process of healthcare transition, and that's something you're kind of going through right now. Can you kind of talk about where you're at with that and how things are going and how you feel about that?
Yes. So being in the midst of the transitioning, it has been a little bit scary because, the pediatric care that I have received has been exceptional. And I am quite a bit older than the pediatric patient. I'm 24. So this is a pretty late transition to me. But my PCP, Dr. Pickler, and I decided that, transition for me should happen kind of at the same time as the other transitions in my life. So I just graduated college, and I am beginning to go to work. That is a big transition. And so we just decided to start now, even though it's a little bit late. I have done a lot of research, and I've definitely had endless emails with Dr. Pickler about how to do this and, what are the best options for me as a special needs patient. I just want to make sure I have all my options open before making a decision and switching over. And so it has gone particularly well, but I couldn't have done it without Dr. Pickler.
Mhm.
for sure.
And one thing, and before we go any further, I really want to encourage our listeners as well. If you have any questions for Teresa, I would love for you to either type them in the question box so that we can really include you guys in this conversation, because she's a totally valuable resource. So one thing we had talked about when we were planning for this episode was sort of how when you're a more complex young adult with severe healthcare needs, you sort of establish this communication dynamic with your providers because there are so many people in that game. And one fear or hesitation about transitioning is that that chain of communication is really going to be broken, and that's really going to put more responsibility on you as a young adult when you may not be feeling at your best. So how has Dr. Pickler kind of worked with you and been adamant about making sure that communication between new providers, really is present and that you feel comfortable?
Well, I think it initially started when I kind of expressed that fear of transitioning to Dr. Pickler. And one of the fears is definitely kind of glazing over communication. I have a very long medical history. And so if my new provider doesn't take the time to communicate with, my former provider, in this case, Dr. Pickler, a lot of things can fall through the cracks a lot, which would result in a patient being very sick. And so, obviously Dr. Pickler is a huge advocate for that as well, for transitioning and being a part of the transition so that, it goes smoothly. And she, I think what's made me feel a lot more secure about this is that she has told me, that I want to be involved in each step. So I want to communicate, and I want to kind of give your new provider a little history about you. And I want to be involved for as long as I can so that, when you fully transition, that it is successful and that you can still receive the same care as when you were in pediatrics. And so that is kind of the support that I've been receiving from Dr. Pickler, and just kind of the security knowing that she's willing to communicate with the new provider. And so now it kind of leaves it in the hands of the new provider, whether or not and how proactive they are at that communication with her.
Great. Thanks, Teresa. So you mentioned that, you are a little bit older kind of to be starting this transition process, but you sort of planned it around where your life was at and other transitions that were happening. When did you start having the conversation with Dr. Pickler and sort of make that decision? Like, what was the turning point for you when you realized that you needed to at least start talking about transition?
We started talking about transition when I don't remember now. It's been so long. At the age of 16, I believe. And just, obviously it was it was not as developed then as a 16-year-old. But it was just kind of a conversation about, well, let's get A, B, and C in place so that when you transition, whenever you're ready, that we have this. So that was the beginning of it. And then it's just kind of been incorporated into every visit, per se, with her. I don't know if there was a turning point to when to start about talking about transition, but the turning point to actually transitioning was literally just me graduating high school and accepting a job.
Excellent. And I think that is such an important thing that, we at Got Transition really talk about, is part of a successful transition is really understanding what's going on in that young person's life and seeing when certain steps would make sense. Like my path was really similar. I transitioned my primary care physician when I was 18, but with my specialist, which was definitely going to be more complicated, we had the conversation when I turned 18, and then he had agreed to keep me until after college because, like you said, at that point, there were just other transitions, and it was something that I wasn't ready to take on at that point. So he kept me through college, and then when, I was starting to work and things, it was sort of like, okay, now the pieces are starting to come together, and I feel more comfortable taking on that other transition too. So another question that I have and that I've heard from a lot of people about transitioning is it's difficult sometimes to find adult providers, especially specialists, who are willing to take on more complex patients because they're either just too busy or afraid that they're not going to have the knowledge of the condition, or just for a lot of reasons. So was Dr. Pickler really supportive in helping you find those new providers?
Yes, Dr. Pickler. So that's kind of what I mean when I say I'm right in the midst of it. So our next appointment will actually be to a specific provider. I know that I've done quite a bit of research just reading a lot about things, on the internet and in my healthcare benefits booklet. And so I've kind of made a few notes, and I know Dr. Pickler said that she, has a specific list of people in mind for me, and that I think is going to be our next conversation. So I haven't found that one provider, and that is the fear that, it might be too much, and I don't know if I don't know who can handle kind of a health history like mine, but I think it's doable. I just think, again, if I find someone who's just as proactive as getting the process started with that, then I think that would kind of give me an idea of, how proactive they're going to be in my life for the future.
Yep. And it sounds like you have a great system, and, Dr. Pickler is really adamant about communicating and making sure that it would be someone who is, willing to accept that. So we do have a, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to address a question that was asked. So the question is, do you have other adults in your life, parents, healthcare provider, friend, that accompanies you to medical appointments as an adult? And sometimes I do take a friend or my sister or my mom. I usually ask my mom to go with me as a last resort. She is a huge worrywart, and any kind of appointment kind of worries her. So I don't, I tend to not ask her to go with me as much. But a lot of the appointments that I go to, I actually go to by myself, just because I can, and I don't know, unless it's going to be a really stressful appointment, then I will make somebody in my life go with me.
Mm-hmm. And you said something when we were discussing the episode and doing a practice run about how you involve your family through the process, and you sort of do that more after the fact. Can you explain a little bit about that?
I do. I do kind of let them know a little bit after the fact. So I come from a Vietnamese family. My parents are both from Vietnam, and I grew up in a non-English speaking culture. And so a lot of my pediatric appointments were accompanied by an interpreter to kind of help us understand what was going on. And then as I got older and started to understand things a little bit, I became their interpreter for my parents. And then pretty soon, going into adulthood and college and after college, I was the main decision maker in my own house. And so I don't know why I feel the need to include them last. Again, it's the whole worry thing, and I do want to kind of have this roll down as a self-advocate. I want to make sure that I can handle these things like transition that is very difficult things to kind of grasp, and I want to make sure that, I'm doing the best that I can to do that. So that's probably why I don't include my parents as much.
Yeah. We have another question, and I know that it's one that Eileen would be able to speak to wonderfully if she were here, and I'll try to sort of take her place. For individuals with more significant disabilities, assuming the guardian or parent would play a much bigger role in the transition process. And I know that Eileen would say absolutely, it's a very different world, as she has a daughter who is transitioning and is nonverbal and needs 24/7 care. But the way she says it is that, it's still a very person-centered process, but in those scenarios, it's really about involving the whole support system, like we just talked about, and really having a plan for that young adult and where you want to see them in their life and what health needs really need to be addressed. And so it's definitely more of a team effort rather than just dealing with that one person. And I will make sure that she sees this question and is able to contribute her thoughts as well. So thank you. And we had, this is a great question, and it's something that I was going to mention as well. With our electronic-based society, do you use email to keep in touch with medical providers, such as to update them on how things are going or to have questions answered? With complex medical needs, it seems inefficient to schedule appointments for such communications, but some are not comfortable using email. What are your thoughts on this? And I think that's great because you referenced emailing Dr. Pickler, and that's not something that we hear a lot about, but I think it's very pertinent for our generation. So I would love for you to answer that question.
Oh God, I don't know, because I'm so used to emailing everything, so I can't even imagine not being comfortable using email. I would suggest that, in that case, I do think that it makes sense to have, like, for example, how about phone appointments? Dr. Pickler and I have also done that a couple of times where she would call me whenever it was convenient for her because, she's a busy woman and in high demand. And so we schedule a time, and she calls me, and we chat for about 30 minutes to an hour, just exactly about what you were talking about, giving them an update on how things are going. I usually call her with a question about transitioning, and so we will have a conversation about that. I think as long as the provider is cool with that method, I think that's perfectly fine, in my opinion. What do you think, Mallory?
Yeah, I agree, and I think it really depends on the provider. I know Dr. Pickler from our work with Got Transition, and she is pretty much a transition superstar who goes above and beyond to connect with her patients. And I sort of use email with my other medical providers who deal with my medical supplies and my planning and sort of maintaining part of things. But I don't actually email with my providers, but sometimes I wish I could, just because that's how I function, and it's a lot easier than going through offices and having to call and hit numbers. And I mean, I think we all pretty much know that when you call a doctor's office, you don't get a person right away. And so
Exactly.
I think that's a more direct way. And I think we'll be seeing more and more of that, but right now it just depends on what providers are comfortable with. So unfortunately, we are really running short on time, but I would love to end with one more question before we wrap up, and that is, what is the most exciting part of your transition journey to date, Teresa?
In healthcare?
In healthcare and then just in general.
The most exciting thing. In healthcare, I would say to finally be able to finish the one aspect of, I guess, my life that I feel like has not become an adult yet. So transitioning into adult care, I think, is the most exciting thing. And really having it happen right now instead of just talking about it for years is exciting for me. As far as life goes, the most exciting thing right now is having an adult job. And it's exciting and scary at the same time. I've been a student for so long, 17 years, and I feel like it's like a whole new world out here, which sounds really dramatic, but that's the most exciting thing right now in my life.
Great. So on your screen, you'll see some links to a couple of resources that Teresa has found helpful in her journey, and some more information about Colorado's work with medical home. And what we really like on that website is just the profiles of some of the other youth leaders and their healthcare stories. And the first link is a manual by Dr. Pickler about transition from a provider's perspective, which I think is so valuable in all of this conversation. And also, Teresa was willing to provide her contact information as a resource. So if you have any questions or anything you want to kind of talk to her about, she's been willing to provide that, which I think is great. So as we wrap up, as always, I really encourage you to check out Got Transition's website, find us on Facebook and Twitter, where we will post lots of updates about upcoming episodes, upcoming webinars, everything that we are doing. And to hear past episodes of Got Transition Radio, you can check out our website and find them under broadcasts, or subscribe as a podcast if that's something that you utilize with iTunes. It's free of charge, and you can get all the episodes right there. Also, for your convenience, we have the link to the next episode, which is going to be on May 23rd, and we will be having another young adult come to talk about his transition experience and how that led him on a path to doing more with healthcare leadership. So with that, I really want to thank you, Teresa, so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and tell your story and answer questions. And I think it's been a great episode.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on here. And thanks everybody for your interest on this very important topic.
And yes, the resources will be available on our website when the broadcast is posted as well. So the questions and the resources will be available. And I don't want to go too much later. So with that, I would love to thank everybody for tuning in, whether it's your first time or you're a return listener. And just remind you that every transition is unique, just like you. Have a great day.